Hello and welcome to another wrap-up video. If this is the first video of mine that you're watching, my name is Anna Marie, and if this is not, welcome back. Today, as you can tell by the title, I am going to be going through the books that I read in August and September because I didn't read very much in either month. However, what I did read, I really enjoyed. So without further ado, let's dive right into the books. Rather than talk about the books chronologically in the order that I read them, like I tend to do, I'm actually going to jump around a little bit in this video because over the course of August and September, I did read multiple books within the same series. And first up, that is going to be The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. So in August, I read Eldest, and then in September, I read Brisingr. So let's start with Eldest here. I really enjoyed this. The Inheritance Cycle is part of a buddy read that I'm doing with a friend over on Bookstagram, which I have already briefly discussed here on BookTube, but I am enjoying this series so much more this time around. If you are not familiar with The Inheritance Cycle, it is about a dragon rider. Our protagonist is named Aragon, and one day while he is in the forest, he discovers a dragon egg. That egg hatches into Saphira, who becomes his bonded dragon, and thus Aragon is pulled into a grand war much beyond his wildest imaginations. And that is because dragon riders in Allegasia have been hunted near to extinction by the only other known dragon rider, Galbatorix, who is the evil king in this situation. The stakes are starting to rise as we get farther into the series, as every fantasy series does. Eldest really focuses on Aragon learning the lay of the land and learning more about the elves and being trained up so that one day he can face Galbatorix in the final battle. Now, I gave Eldest and Brisingr 3 stars, which I believe is what I rated it upon my first read. So I decided to stay true to that rating even though I'm enjoying the series more this time around. It definitely isn't my favorite Dragon Rider series. However, I still really love it. Brisingr was easily the book that I forgot the most about. When I was rereading this, there were certain parts or elements that I had a vague recollection of and I was anticipating them to come up. However, if you know, you know, the biggest plot twist in this book, I had completely forgotten about. And I think because I've read this book before and then I forgot about it, it took me even more by surprise this time around, just because I thought I knew what I was going in for and then I was totally taken aback. I do think if I had read this at a younger age for the first time, I would have the nostalgia tied up within it and therefore my ratings might be a little bit higher. Either way, I am still really enjoying it. It does play on the farm boy turned world savior trope. However, you do see Aragon stumble and fall throughout the series and make mistakes. But then it's also contrasted where sometimes he talks as if he's this 80-year-old war veteran. So that juxtaposition still sits a little bit funnily when I'm reading it. I am about halfway through Inheritance now, so I am nearing that final battle. I've heard mixed things about the conclusion of the book series, so I'm going into it with a grain of salt. However, I'm still really excited for it. I also read A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which is the sequel to From Blood and Ash, and this is the second in the series. Now, full disclosure, I stopped giving this series star ratings after I read A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, because if you saw or read my review for the first book, I had some concerns regarding the consent in this book, and while the second book cleared up my concerns from the first one, it then created even more questionable consent that just left me feeling a bit ick. So even though Armentrout's writing is addictive and I can see the hype surrounding it, the romance element even though it's so revered, to me, it just doesn't sit right. So if you have read this series and you are all for this couple, please comment down below, let me know. I'd love to have a discussion and just kind of air out some of my feelings and concerns with someone who has read the book, because I don't want to get into too much detail and give away any spoilers, just because there are some massive plot twists in this series. But I am very interested to see what someone else's thoughts are on this series, because from what I've seen, everyone on Bookstagram and BookTube just adore this series and haven't flagged the consent as a concern for them. So I feel like the outlier here, but I don't know if I could really recommend that series just because of my personal interpretation of it. All of that said, I did read Crown of Gilded Bone because it came up as available in my library, and I wanted to see what happened next because her writing is so addictive. The plot is really intriguing and engaging. There's a lot of romance in these books, but besides the romance, the plot, I really want to see what happens next. And Crown of Gilded Bone ended in such a different place compared to where this series began, which leaves me even more conflicted because the plot is wonderful. I love what she's doing there. I love where she's taking this book and how she's incorporating these different elements into this world and how we're still getting to know this world and learning more about this world in book 3. I do love that, and I think it's been done really well. It just leaves me still feeling a bit uncomfortable and a bit hesitant to recommend this series because of those concerns I have. So no star ratings for those two books. I did read them. I enjoyed them to an extent. Still felt a bit ick in certain places. Next, a book that I can very much recommend would be The Blackthorn Key by Kevin Sands. I adored this book. I rated it 5 stars. It's a middle grade historical fiction. I adored the relationship between our protagonist Christopher and his best friend Tom. Christopher and Tom are rambunctious and meddlesome and just there for each other through thick and thin, as Christopher winds up in over his head trying to unravel some mysteries concerning the corrupt apothecary guild in his town. I'm very eager to continue on with this series and see if I enjoy the next books as much as I enjoyed the introduction. Next, I read Xenos by Dan Abnett, and this is the first in the Eisenhorn trilogy, as well as my first foray into the Warhammer 40k books, and I have the next 2 ready and rearing to go, so I'm very excited to see how this trilogy continues. I loved Eisenhorn's character, as well just the trope of Inquisitor and the badassness that comes along with that role in this world. I loved the crew that Eisenhorn kind of slowly gathered over the course of this novel and how they all came together, even though there were some suspicions at the beginning that they had to work through as they warmed up to one another. I believe I rated this 4 stars, and I'm also going to read the description right off the very back so that I don't miss anything or spoil anything from the book. So it says, "The Inquisition moves amongst mankind like an avenging shadow, striking down the enemies of humanity with uncompromising ruthlessness. When he finally corners an old foe, Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn is drawn into a sinister conspiracy. As events unfold and he gathers allies and enemies, Eisenhorn faces a vast interstellar cabal and the dark power of demons, all racing to recover an arcane text of abominable power." And I loved watching that slow build of friendship and companionship as they moved from allies to really properly having each other's back when it really mattered. If you can tell, that is a trope that I really love. So I'm really eager to continue on and follow Eisenhorn as he continues on with this quest. And I'm really hoping that the crew we were introduced to in the first book sticks around because I loved how they worked together. Finally, I also read Hench by Natalie, Zina, Walschots. I hope I am pronouncing their name correctly. I think I am, but fingers crossed. Before I go any farther with my review, I do feel the need, however, to preface that you should check out the content warnings. There is some significant and serious body horror that happens within this novel, as well as just some graphic and disturbing actions by all of the characters. So check out the content warnings. Somehow, despite all of that horror, I really enjoyed it. I think Walschots accomplished something really incredible with this book. I am not one typically to compare a book to a show or a show to a book. I don't really like using those comparisons because I do think a creative piece of literature or a creative piece of television, any creative piece of fiction, should stand as its own rather than bear the brunt of being compared to this, that, and the other. All of that said, if you enjoyed The Boys, the TV show, I think you will really enjoy Hench. It confronts millennial culture and superheroes in a really interesting way. It explores the consequences that those superheroes can have and the cost on human life of their actions, and explores the question of what makes a superhero's life worth more than that of a civilian's or of a villain's, and why is there no consequence when those civilians and those villains are brutally treated and maimed and harmed in the way of superheroes. Our protagonist, Anna, works for a villain, and she is fueled by such rage and spite. And I mean, I think a lot of that is rightfully so, but she is motivated by desperation. And that desperation is with her in the very beginning when we're introduced to her character, and it carries throughout the book. I would not say that she has a lot of character development in this book. I think she goes through a lot, but I don't know if she ends the book having learned something from what all took place. And it's first person perspective, so you really get inside Anna's head and you really start to sympathize with her even as she is going and doing all of these awful things that if you take a step back, you're just like, oh my God, that's awful. But you can see how she's rationalizing her actions, and it's just such an interesting premise. I cannot sing its praises enough. I would really like a sequel to see where the author is going to take this series next, because I think there is so much more to explore and so much more that I want. As well, Walschots is a Canadian author, so I love to read Canadian whenever I can. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on what they come out with next, because I would love to pick it up, even if it's not in this world, but I would love it if it was also in this world. So that was it. Those were all of the books that I read over the course of August and September. For me personally, this wasn't a lot of books. I was definitely slower than I usually am. However, the books I did read, I really enjoyed for the most part. From Blood and Ash, kind of the exception there. But enjoying what you're reading is really the whole point. And I know I get caught up in this cycle of comparing my reading pace to the reading pace of people I see online or my friends. And it's really important to remind myself, so I'm going to remind you not to compare your reading pace. Read at the pace that brings you the most enjoyment, because that is, at the end of the day, the whole point. Let me know down in the comments below what you have been reading as we transition into the cooler months, and I will be back very soon with a new video. Bye for now.